Hi, my name is Jonathan Friedberg, and today I would like to speak with you about the English Modernist period of literature. This period ran roughly from 1901 to 1950, or the first half of the 20th century. Now ask yourself, how do you get a real emotional understanding of another time or another place in the world? I mean a real emotional connection to the events of that time and place. This is why this particular literary period is important for you to know about. It's important to understand what happened in the past, and especially what is presently going on in the world around you. Not just the facts and figures as you get from a news report or the newspaper, but real life emotions as well. The writers of this time period introduced brilliant insight into the world around them. And they were able to convey the emotions and the fears and the joys of a very believable fictional reality. To explain this to you, I'm going to touch on three main points. First, we're going to talk about how the writers of the English Modernist period used fictional narratives to give their readers a look into the world of an alternate political reality. They used this technique to warn their readers about the risks of falling prey to political forces that were spreading throughout the world at the time. Next, my second point, we'll discuss how the events of this time period influenced the thinking and the writing of this era. Finally, my third point, we're going to take a look at a literary hero created in this period. He's Winston Smith of George Orwell's 1949 novel, 1984. First, to summarize the literary period. The authors of the modernist period used their writing to express warnings and concerns at a frightening new world order. They used fiction and poetry to tell realistic tales of a not too distant future in which very human individuality that they prized had been usurped by technology, war, and authoritarian political dictatorships. Their writing brought their readers into this new world through their fiction. This allowed them to feel the fears and the sufferings that this dystopian future held. The readers, they could connect to the characters and experience these fears and the feelings right along with the characters. It was a brilliant new technique and a very personal way of writing. So next, let's move on to the second point, which is the historical period itself. This explains why the writers, the authors, did what they did. The modern period, first half of the 20th century, was a time of great political, social, and economic change. The writers of this time period reflected the change in their rejection of styles of the past, their glory of war, the beauty of science fiction technology like not Orson Welles, To the Moon and Back, Jules Verne, that sort of writing. They adopted new forms of writing in poetry and prose, more realistic styles of writing. Their work was influenced greatly by the events of the day. There was rapid industrialization, the loss of rural life as people moved from their farms to cities to work in these huge impersonal factories. The advent of technology was now intruding into their lives with electric lights and telephones and television. And most significantly, they were dealing with the effects of these two disastrous world wars and the political upheaval and new realities that followed. To truly understand the writing of this period, you have to consider the changes that these authors witnessed really in their very own lives. They were born at a time when most people lived on farms. Transportation was by plodding horse or maybe a train. Communication would take weeks by mail, snail mail as we call it today. lighting was gas lamp or candle. But then by 1945, the world had changed to such a point where many people lived in cities, they worked in these big impersonal factories, and they could travel by car or plane, getting across an ocean in hours or around the world in days. Communications instantaneous, where most homes had telephones and radios, and television was becoming more commonplace than bread and butter practically. Yet mankind was even poised on the edge of space. And yet at the same time, through all these great advances, the Soviet Union in particular was a great world power which denied not only the existence of God, but also that of the very individual. Technology was making life more hectic and seemingly more dangerous, as it allowed the Soviet Union and communists to facilitate the rewriting of history through mass media as never before. The literature of this time really reflects the fears and the frantic pace that these authors faced in their own lives. Lastly, let me move on to my third point, which is about Winston Smith, the somewhat inconsistent hero of George Orwell's novel 1984. Smith's an ordinary man. He's working to both serve this large impersonal state apparatus, while at the same time struggling to maintain a sense of his own individuality. This novel paints a wonderful picture and kind of disheartening picture of his struggles, and it indirectly debates the benefits of being an individual versus the benefits of sacrificing oneself for the common good of a large impersonal society. Smith works in what's called the Ministry of Truth, where he is tasked with rewriting history in the form of altering documents and photographs so that they reflect his party current version of events. They've always been at war with East Asia, but then all of a sudden now they've always been allies with East Asia and fighting against Eurasia, and it back and forth, and no one really knows what the truth really is anymore. Smith also commits the very individual crime of falling in love. For this he's arrested and he's tortured in the ironically named Ministry of Love, where he eventually rejects his love interest and he recommits himself to the party and the state. And he even goes so far as to admit that 2 + 2 now equals 5. This really illustrates the absurdity of the power a totalitarian government can have in controlling not only the actions of its people, but their very thoughts. So, in conclusion, the objective of this presentation was to demonstrate how during the English modern era of literature, authors often used fiction as a means to convey a true understanding of another real-life situation. In the case of 1984, I showed you how George Orwell painted a grim portrait of the power of the Soviet state and the risks of letting down our guard against the perceived communist expansion of the times. This novel, through the eyes of Winston Smith, his hero, illustrates the fear and the uncertainty around this new world order in the post-World War II era. And to recap, I've covered 3 main points. First, how authors of this period used fictional narratives as a means to convey and express their ideas in ways that mere essays and news reports could not. Secondly, we talked about the events of the time period during the first half of the 20th century and how they influenced the thinking and the writing and the style of this era. And finally, we discussed how George Orwell used his novel's protagonist, Winston Smith, as the vehicle with which to convey his message of warning against the threats a totalitarian state posed for the individuality of its citizens. I hope you found this presentation interesting, and thank you.